All right, so we're going to talk about those special species within an ecosystem. So each ecosystem is made up of those individuals, those populations, and those communities. Well, some of those species actually have very important roles, whether that's positive or negative within the ecosystem that we're going to study. So the top one is keystone species, and then we have introduced and invasive species. So the first one we're going to talk about is actually a keystone species. So a keystone species is a species whose niche is absolutely critical to the success of the ecosystem. So this is a species that's made itself so important within an ecosystem that its niche, its job is so vital to the support and success that we'll actually see that entire ecosystem begin to crumple and collapse if that species declines. So again, if a keystone species population declines, the entire ecosystem is affected. So probably one of the most famous examples here in the US is the Yellowstone wolves. So Yellowstone National Park actually had some concerns about its wolf population. So local farmers and local landowners were concerned about the wolves essentially leaving Yellowstone and coming and destroying their livestock and being in their yards and in their neighborhoods. And, you know, wolves are a large predatory animal. They're an apex predator, which means they are the top of the food chain. They are that apex, they are that top species. And a lot of times those apex predators do end up being keystone species and playing a really vital role in the ecosystem. Well, the Yellowstone wolves were no exception. So because of the concerns of the locals and local farmers and local landowners, they actually started to remove the wolf population from Yellowstone, whether that be from hunting or most of the time just through relocation. Well, as the wolf population declined, the deer population rose, and so did some of the populations of those other species, which actually led to a chain of events that led the riverbeds be eroded. So now these once blossoming riverbeds are muddy, and the water quality has just completely gone down. And all the other species in Yellowstone National Park, the plants, the animals, even the water quality, again, were all affected because of the removal of those wolves. So with that realization and kind of with that connection to them being keystone species, we're actually reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone National Park. So another cool example is the gopher tortoise. So the gopher tortoise is native to central and southern Florida. So they're a big tortoise. So they're a big tortoise, but these big tortoises, like most tortoises, actually will dig burrows underground. Well, the gopher tortoises are kind of special. So because central and southern Florida are home to a lot of really small native animals and a lot of really bad weather, Central Florida is actually the lightning capital of the world. They also get hurricanes. Well, those gopher tortoises, because they're so big, when they burrow in an area, they're going to leave that big hole when they move on and dig a new one, which they do fairly frequently. So as they abandon their burrow, they've now left essentially this safe haven, this safe cave that all those other species can take shelter in during those bad weather patterns. So those gopher tortoises end up essentially creating a home for all those other species, which is why they are going to be considered a keystone species. All right, so we have two other really special types of species within an ecosystem. Now, these tend to be a little more problematic. So our first would be our introduced or our non-native species. So an introduced species is a species that is not originally from an ecosystem, but that is not yet causing harm. So they've come over, they're not native here, this isn't their natural ecosystem or habitat, but they're not really interfering with that natural ecosystem at this point. So one example of that is the muntjac. So muntjac are really small deer. They're about this tall, total, full grown. They're a really unique species. They actually scavenge, they have little fangs. But these muntjac, these small deer, are typically, they're native to Asia, to parts of Southeast Asia, and they've actually been introduced into the United Kingdom. Now, right now, they have a decent muntjac population in the United Kingdom, so even though they're non-native, they have a decent sized population, but they're not yet causing harm. They're not yet interfering with the natural ecosystem in the parts of the United Kingdom that they're in. So right now, they're considered an introduced species. Now, Where that changes is when they do start to cause harm. When you start to see them interfering with the natural ecological roles that those other species play, that's when they're considered an invasive species. Now, these guys are a big deal, and they are extremely problematic and something that ecologists are really focusing on right now as we see that problem get worse and worse in the US. So invasive species are non-native species this is a non-native species that is harming the ecosystem. So the way that they harm the ecosystem is they're going to fulfill the same niche as a native species would. So they are coming in and they are essentially competing for jobs. They're competing for that role in that ecosystem. We said that within an ecosystem, each animal has its own unique niche. Well, and since each animal has its own unique niche and they've kind of figured that out to where they're not really competing with each other and they can all coexist, invasive species are going to come in and throw off that competition piece. So now these species that are native to their ecosystem are having to fight for those resources that they were once essentially guaranteed. So one of the really big examples here, especially in North Carolina, is kudzu weed. So kudzu weed, it looks kind of like ivy and it grows over everything. In fact, and sometimes it's referred to as the weed that ate the South. So kudzu is a big problem here. Next time you're driving down the highway, I encourage you to look out your window. You'll definitely see it. It's covering everything. So we also have lionfish. That's a big problem in Florida and in the whole Gulf of Mexico. Someone actually had a lionfish as a pet, and they do have a poisonous barb on their head, so you've got to watch out for them. But those lionfish are really beautiful. So someone brought one over as a pet, decided they didn't want it, released it out into the wild, and that essentially caused this entire, rapid spread of lionfish population in Florida, and they are killing off a lot of native species and causing big problems for Florida's natural coral reefs. And another big problem for North Carolina, talking more about plants than animal competition, is the emerald ash borer. So the emerald ash borer is a little beetle, and this little beetle actually comes over in foreign firewood, of all things. So foreign furniture, foreign wood, it's going to bore into that and it's going to stay there. So emerald ash borers are actually killing North Carolina ash trees at a really alarming rate. We at one point had, I think, the most ash trees in the country. If not, we were in the top 3 for sure. So we had all of these big, beautiful ash trees that were so important to the ecosystem because they're so old and so rooted, and they provide homes and food and shelter for so many animals. And now these little bitty beetles are coming over and actually destroying our entire ash population. So cases like these are why we definitely want to watch out for those invasive species and do those simple things like in North Carolina, one of the things they're recommending is you actually just check your firewood for insects. And if you see them, make sure that you do kill them because invasive species, it actually is encouraged that you take them out of the ecosystem in whatever safe way you can. Lots and lots of websites tell you proper ways to kind of deal with invasive species as you get there. So again, introduced are not harmful, invasive are, and that's going to be that really important distinction because they sound similar, very different things.